Hello and welcome to my channel. Normally I review new movies and television shows and release a new review every day from Monday to Friday. Today, instead of reviewing a new movie or TV show, I want to talk about how I review. The aim of this video is to give you some insight into what I look for, what I like to see, and what mistakes I focus on and why. I'm slightly different from other reviewers in how I judge, and what sets me apart are the areas I tend to focus on and my ability to look past flaws and find the good. I focus on the fundamentals of filmmaking and place a higher emphasis on elements such as visual, audio, and what the actors are doing. How a film presents its story is as important to me as the story itself. That doesn't mean that I don't judge movies by their story, but that I weigh it equally to the other aspects of the film. So to start off, I'll do a quick rundown of my 10-point system before diving into each of the sections and giving a deeper explanation. There are 5 categories for a movie to score points in, and each category is worth 2 points. The 5 categories are audio, visual, story, acting, and entertainment value. I mark off how a film does in each section, then tally up the points to get my rating. When I do my reviews, I write about the different areas of the film and present the rating at the end. Each category has its own criteria for scoring points, so let's jump into it. To start off, we'll begin with the story category. To get the 2 story points from me, a movie needs to have a clear story that follows logically from start to finish, and it has to be told in an entertaining way. These seem like vague markers, so let me elaborate. For a story to make sense from start to finish, it can't have any major plot holes, characters can't randomly change their minds or act too out of character, and the premise has to be somewhat sound. For plot holes, I'm referring specifically to instances where the story goes against its own established rules in order to progress the story. For example, let's look at the Ant-Man franchise. Its major plot hole is in how the suit works. It's explained that Ant-Man maintains his mass no matter what size he's at, which is what allows him to beat people up as an ant-sized man. That means that he should be weak as a giant, but he isn't. He's like King Kong, and the movie frequently uses his giant form for his super strength. They also forget about the weight of objects they shrink, like the building and cars they carry around in many form. When I talk about characters acting out of turn, I'm talking about contrived stupidity and other instances where a character goes against their nature and does something they would never do in order to make the story happen. For this one, let's look at the Star Wars sequel trilogy. The entire trilogy revolves around the remnants of the rebels fighting against a new order vying for control of the galaxy. The group is led by Kylo Ren, a character who turned evil after his uncle tried to kill him. In Star Wars: The Last Jedi, we see why Luke Skywalker tried to kill him. He had a bad dream about Kylo being evil sometime in the future. Without talking to anyone or thinking about it at all, he immediately went to kill his nephew in the middle of the night. Just as a reminder, this is the same guy who risked his own life to redeem his father. The guy who cut off his hand, murdered children, and helped lead an oppressive galactic empire for 20 years. For the last part about a premise being sound, I mean that there can't be any easy solution to the story that characters are ignoring for unknown reasons, and it can't rely on unrealistic understandings of the world unless it clearly fits into the fantasy category. Fantasy movies are based on fantastical premises, so I tend not to judge them based on it, but will be harsher if they don't follow their established ground rules. For an example of a movie with an easy solution, let's look at Avengers: Infinity War. The premise of this film is that Thanos, an alien, believes that the universe can't sustain life as it is, and he goes around decimating half of all life on every planet he conquers in order to give the other half a better chance. His grand plan is to grab 5 magic space stones that will essentially give him the powers of God and allow him to reshape the universe as he sees fit. He plans to use the stones to decimate half of all life, but he could just as easily wish for the universe to be able to sustain more people. When you realize that, his whole persona becomes clownish and silly. For an example of a film that relies on an unrealistic premise, I'll use Barbarian. The premise of this movie is that there is an Airbnb in a sketchy neighborhood in a bad part of town. The place gets double booked and a man and a woman end up staying there together. When the woman discovers a secret room underneath the house, the man insists on investigating without telling anyone, and then the woman follows him down into the darkness 10 minutes later. One of them is killed and the other is held hostage by a monster living under the house. They are missing for 2 weeks before the owner of the house shows up and falls into the same trap. No one called the cops and reported either of these people missing, despite one of them being a minor celebrity and even after 2 weeks of them being missing. If they had, they would easily have found out that both of them were staying at this house before they went missing. Airbnb has records of who rented what and when. For a story to be considered entertaining, it has to balance the level of excitement against how much information is provided and how much time is given to pacing. A good example of an entertaining film is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. The premise is that Scott, a young musician, meets a new woman named Ramona and starts a romance with her. While the two date, Scott is attacked by 7 of Ramona's exes, and Scott is forced to defeat all 7 of them in order to be with her. The film goes through a constant cycle of introducing a character, giving a backstory that plays into the grander narrative, and then seeing them throw down with Scott. They have these grandiose, larger-than-life fights using musical instruments, magic, and even vegan superpowers. Then the cycle begins again with a new ex. Each iteration of the cycle feels like a mini build-up and climax, and each fight feels extremely rewarding. What makes it feel this way is that the film establishes characters quickly and thoroughly at the same time. You feel like you know the exes and why they're there with just a few quick lines and a scene or two to flesh them out. After the story is the acting category. There are 2 things that are important for actors in my opinion. They need to get the emotions of the character right, and they need to have enough screen presence or charisma to draw my eye. Getting the emotions right entails acting in a way congruent with how the character is presented in the story. So if a character is sad about a family member's death, they look upset. When someone is in pain, they look hurt. And if they're happy, they show it. The better an actor can portray those emotions, the better they are. As for presence, this is easy to judge when someone lacks it completely or when someone has a ton of it, but can be confusing when people have little. For example, Christian Bale is an actor with a ton of screen presence. In Thor, Love and Thunder, he plays Gore. He commandeers the screen anytime he appears and draws your eye right to him. He always gives a level of importance to what he's saying and comes across clearly. He also nails every emotional aspect of the character's transformation, from a normal father broken by the death of his child to a psychopathic murderer that travels the universe killing gods. Then you have actors like Dwayne Johnson. He's got one expression, one tone, and always speaks like he's telling you what you want to hear so he can leave faster. In roles like Black Adam, he fails to show any emotion and looks like a statue at times. The only thing that makes him noticeable is his physique. In the middle, you have actors like Danny Trejo. He's great at being menacing, and he can play a gangster or a hired killer as few others can. But the second you stick him in other roles, he struggles to bring out the emotions he needs to make the characters work. Now, let's move on to the visual category. This category tends to be my simplest one, but one in which most films struggle for silly reasons. Having said that, I look for a smooth and clear presentation of the story, and for the movie to have at least a few captivating or intricate shots in it related to the subject matter. So, I want to see smooth shots with little to no shaking, properly lit sets, and camera angles that capture the characters and their actions clearly. It's a pretty simple list to get the first point. The second point is a little harder and requires the work to put forth a few examples of good genre-defining scenes. In horror, this means they must have scenes that are overtly disgusting or terrifying. In action, it means big explosions, fast chases, brutal fights, and daring stunts. And in dramas, it means scenes where they capture powerful emotions. A great example of this is the long-take hallway fight scene from Daredevil. In it, Daredevil walks down a hallway into a room and begins a fight with a gang. The camera backs out into the hallway to capture Daredevil throwing a man through the door, and the fight spills out into the hallway. We watch from start to finish as every goon in the building rushes in and gets beaten down by the masked hero. It captures just how exhausting a feat it is, and we get to see in intricate detail how fighting like this takes its toll even on an expert. By the end, Daredevil is making so many mistakes due to his tiredness that he's actually getting hit by shots that he dodged earlier in the fight. It's the most realistic version of one man beating down a group that I've ever seen, and even though it's still fantastical, it perfectly captures the level of brutality and skill that make Daredevil who he is. Moving on to the audio. For the audio category, the 2 important factors for me are, does it use music effectively, and is the music significant to the story? To use music effectively, filmmakers choose a track that gives off the mood they want and mix it into the scene in a way that doesn't overpower the rest of it. The music isn't louder than the vocals, and it isn't distracting from the visuals. The best examples of this come from Star Wars. Like in Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith, the theme that plays during the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan follows every single beat of the fight and makes each moment feel epic. For the soundtrack to be significant, it can't be too simple, and it can't be overused. There are a lot of movies right now that use single instrument tracks to a nauseating degree, and it's starting to feel like a cheap gimmick. Soft piano melodies for love scenes or emotional moments, and screeching noises coming from violins for horrors and thrillers. Unlocked was a recent example of this that comes to mind. Every time the antagonist appears on screen in this movie, some ominous tones play to let us know how to feel about him. It just makes him feel cartoonish and silly. Finally, we have the entertainment section. This section is the most subjective and is based on my own experiences and knowledge rather than on anything concrete. The first point is for being entertaining as a whole. Basically, did I enjoy your work from start to finish, or did I hate the experience? This might seem similar to other categories, but it is more about whether or not the flaws of your film outweigh the pros. There are movies like The Bourne Supremacy out there with a great story, great acting, cool stunts, and well choreographed fights, but with a camera so shaky that it made me nauseous. This point exists to reward works that are well-rounded and feel polished, but also achieve what they set out to do. The second point is for being experimental or innovative. This is hard to quantify, but I best explain it by pointing to films like Scott Pilgrim. They wanted the film to feel like a live-action comic book, and it does. All the little sound effects and clever bits of cinematography mixed with animation create a fantastical feeling that I don't think other movies have done as well before or since. I give this point out to make note of those works that go out of their way to bring a unique aspect to their story. Now that I've talked your ear off about how I give out points, I want to say that I'm not a perfect person and I make mistakes too. This is all subjective and everything here is just my opinion. It is okay to watch and enjoy movies or television shows for whatever reason you like, and I only make these videos in order to give my opinion, start a discussion, and create a community of people who like talking about movies. If you have any thoughts or opinions on my system or how I apply it, feel free to challenge me whenever and wherever. I'll try to justify myself, and if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit it. That's it for this video. Bye bye.